So what I'm going to do is put some empirical context in some ways to a lot of the themes that were discussed all morning and certainly in the prior panel, which is to say that, if we think about it, the expectations of all of the people that we deal with, our employees, the citizens, all of our constituents have radically changed in the last 5 or 10 years. That's not me. That's not me either. Let's keep going there. All right. So, and a lot of it's because of this, right? We all are used to the smartphone revolution that has completely transformed the expectations that we have, whether it's the way that we travel, the way that we buy things, the way that we exercise or track our lack of exercise in my case, right? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that we use these devices that have totally transformed the way that we live and the way that we operate. And they've set our expectations in extraordinarily high ways. The bar is extremely high. And that's not just true for what we think of when we want to interact with with commercial applications. It's certainly true as well when we poll citizens. We ask empirical data of what do citizens expect of government. And this is a recent poll that we did which showed that 85% of Americans expect government to provide equal or better service online. This is all in the context of online services. And to further put it in perspective, that's a 10 percentage point increase from the time that we did the survey within 2 years earlier than that. So the citizen expectations continue to grow. We call this liquid expectations because our expectations flow from one part of our lives to the other. We don't turn it off and say, oh, I had this amazing experience calling an Uber car or buying something, and now I'm going to interact with government. It's okay. I don't mind that I can't do it online or it's really challenging or, to the earlier panel's discussion, lawyers have to open up a manual and go to extensive training to do something. The expectations do not change. They're fundamentally have not. And so what I'm going to talk about today is one of the most exciting advances that I've seen in the many decades of work that I've been doing in the technology industry. My boyishly young looks don't really speak to my true age, okay? So what I'm going to talk about is design thinking and service design. How many folks have heard of design thinking before? Okay, a handful of folks. How many of you guys have heard of service design? A handful of folks as well. Okay, so let me just demystify this. I think that this concept really sums it up. It's an outside-in approach. When we're going to build a system, historically in technology, oftentimes we thought about it from efficiency. We thought about the process and driving cost out or time savings. But what we rarely thought about was the human dimension to it. We rarely thought about all the people who were going to be interacting with that system. And what we're going to talk about this morning is really what I'm going to talk about is how we transform that approach using service design and design thinking. So, what I say is all these experiences that we're used to, great experiences don't just happen. They get created. Okay, so let me demystify what service design is. I understand that 90% of you raised your hands earlier. I won't ask you to do it again. I know it's very tiring. That you've used Uber in the last 30 days, right? Think about the Uber experience and some of the fundamental, subtle things that happened when they created this experience. Now, I'm not just talking about an app. I'm talking about the experience. Fundamentally, we're getting in a stranger's car. It's, in most places, an unlicensed stranger's car. Not, I mean driver's license. I mean not regulated. It's not a regulated industry in most places, right? And that creates this peculiar scenario where they had to make us trust that we're going to do this. So first, they created digital trust with a rating system. We rate our drivers. Everybody knows that you get rated as well, right? Does everybody know this? You can check your rating if you're interested. Whenever I let my brother use Uber, my rating goes down. It makes me very angry, right? But there's first this notion of digital trust. Secondly, one of the most fundamental things that they did is they show you the navigation. They show you exactly where your car is. In the past, I used to call a taxi. I'd call a black car. I'm trying to get to the airport. I'm trying to get wherever I am. I don't know where it is. It makes me mental. Right now, if I see on a screen exactly where that driver is, I don't care if they're, it frustrates me when they're going in the wrong direction, but at least I know that where they are and they're going in the wrong direction, okay? So that fundamental transparency, the ease of use, the trust, the approachability is why Uber is as extraordinarily successful as it is. It's not just because they designed a cool, easy-to-use app. It's the overall experience that they created. And fundamentally, this is what we'll call an outside-in approach. Instead of thinking about the technology and what it can enable, we say, well, technology is a critical enabler. Let's think about the people who are going to use the system. We think about it, most of us, I presume, as users. Perhaps some people here are Uber drivers as well, but that's the other part of their equation. The drivers have to be attracted. That's a competitive market for them to get drivers to want to drive with them instead of their competitors or other services. So it's a complete rethinking of the process. Okay? So there's a couple of key steps that are part of this transition. First, you have to think about the end-to-end experience you're trying to create, not just the technology or a specific nugget or element of it. Second, as we heard through the panels this morning, you need a customer-centric view of things. You need to think about it with the people who are going to use the system in mind. And of course, we have to make sure that we're not doing everything in isolation, and part of the experience is exceptional, and then you hit a brick wall. How many times have we had that experience before, right? So the way that we do this is with this concept called service design. More people raised their hand and said they knew what design thinking is than service design. All that service design is the design of services using design thinking concepts. And for those who don't know what it is, rather than giving more reflexive definitions of it, I'll actually explain it in a little bit more detail, all right? Let me contrast it with just user experience. User experience, or user experience design, is about making things pretty. It's about making a specific thing look good or easy to use, okay? It's about taking the visual characteristics of something. And this is absolutely critical, because if it's not, doesn't look good, if it's not easy to use, then a lot of times, it doesn't matter how great the technology is, people won't use it. Okay, so it has to be approachable and easily adoptable. But what service design is not just thinking about one point of interaction, it's thinking about all the different components of the interaction at the same time. Not just a screen, but the overall experience. It also thinks very heavily about the perspectives of the people, and oftentimes the emotions of the people involved. That sounds kind of peculiar. How often do we talk about emotions when we talk about information systems? Very rarely. But think about just the prior panel and some of the examples they were using. If a veteran is trying to apply for benefits, don't you think there's an emotional component of that when they're trying to get help from their government? If there's someone who gets a debt collection notice from the United States government, don't you think there's an emotional component to that? Okay, so we have to think about the people and what they're going through and design the processes to try to adapt to that, to try to alleviate those components and make it as exceptional experience as you can, which I know is peculiar if you say debt collection, right? But I mean, how many of you guys have gotten a letter from the IRS in the mail? Fortunately, I can't speak to debt collection. I've never gotten a debt collection notice from the from the government, but I have gotten an IRS letter. And I don't know about you, when I see the IRS letter, I'm like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Or what did my account do wrong? Now, I am like the squeakiest clean taxpayer ever, okay? So it's always a mistake of some sort, but I'm filled with this dread. What's it gonna take me to resolve this? How am I gonna have to deal with this? What do I have to prove, et cetera, right? Well, how do we evolve that? How do we take that emotion out of it and make it more comfortable and easy? Because guess what? Most of us are law-abiding, tax-paying, good, clean, tax-paying Americans who believe it's our duty to pay federal taxes because of all the services that pay for most of the agencies you guys work for, among other amazing services, right? So how do we take that fear out of the process? That's what service design is about. It's about thinking about all of these components when we're designing the system in the first place, okay? And really, it's about, there's exceptional potential to leverage service design and rethinking the way that we provide services. I think this might have been shot like right here, actually, when I look down here and I see the Capitol. Oh, you can't really see it. There's like a little Capitol building in the background. So it might have been shot right here. Anyway, the concept is we want to use service design to help rethink the way that we're providing service to citizens and our constituents, but also employees. Most of your agencies don't have a couple of employees. They have hundreds, thousands, in some cases tens or hundreds of thousands of employees. Okay, and it's about how do we enable them the same way, your employee base is larger than many consumer bases of major corporations. How do we think about these elements when we're designing and leveraging the technology in the first place? Let me give you a specific example from a different part of the world, because a lot of times it's easier than giving a specific US example where people get a little bit concerned about whatever the specific example is. Okay, so Finland is a very fascinating country where they had a challenge. They have an immigration, a lot of people are trying to flow in immigrants from other parts of Europe, some refugees who are trying to apply, and they had a challenge, which is how do they rethink the process of applying cleanly for citizenship to Finland in a way that they can properly do background checks on individuals, they can make sure that they're letting the right people into the country, but at the same time that they have the degree of openness that they've agreed to have as a people. And so they applied service design to rethink the process of what do people go through when they have to apply? What do they have? Do they have a computer? Or are they more likely to just have a cell phone that they're doing the application on? And how do they, in the process, rethink how they're driving the whole process from soup to nuts of applying to vetting to accepting people to come into the country? Right, so we rebuilt the entire process, both process and technology. And that's what's really key. It's not just about applying technology, it's about both at the same time. And you can see the results. 52-day reduction in processing time. I mean, that's exceptional for a lot of folks. But what's, I think, more important is the satisfaction statistics, the 93% positive rating. How many of your systems get a 93% positive rating from the people who use them? I mean, 93%, you can't get much higher than 93%. I'm not just saying the obvious, like, it's only 7 points. I mean, literally, there's always going to be doubters. There's always going to be naysayers who are going to say no. I mean, that's almost like the natural high that you can get in terms of satisfaction of a system. And it's because they used service design. We thought through the process very differently about how to create not only the technology, but the systems to support it. So let me unpack this a little bit and give you a little taste of what service design is with some of the elements. Then I'm happy to open up to any questions, and I'll keep you guys back on track for time. Okay? So the first is, where do I start? I think that there's a handful of key things you can think about when you think about where to start. But the first is you have to think about the people. What are their behaviors? How do they act? How are they going to react? And how, again, can the technology support that, not just become a process that they're forced to use, but flow naturally into that process? Of course, we're not just talking about thinking about nothing but emotions. You have to think about the systems and the technology and what it's able to do and be very focused on the potential of that technology while you're designing what's the art of the possibles. You don't want to create some futuristic thing that's not realistic, that can't be built, okay? But you shouldn't be encumbered just by the technology when you're thinking about this. You got to think about the data. How do you connect things together? How do you integrate the experience with other components of the systems, right? And then, of course, how do you actually bring this and make it a live system that's not just live using the technology, but that enables the user to do it as easily as possible? And there's this key word that's in the third column here called personalization. Personalization is huge. Okay? When you can make systems that adapt to what the user's trying to do, and even ideally anticipate what they're trying to do, it just makes it so much more approachable and easy. I mean, when you go to, I'm a voracious Amazon consumer, okay? They know a lot about me. And when I go to Amazon's website, how easy do they make it to buy things? You know that they patented this ridiculous concept, which I'm very scared of, for my own personal pocketbook, by the way, which is anticipatory shipping. They patented this concept that doesn't exist yet, where they're going to start to ship things to me because they know that I want it before I even know that I want it. And then if I don't actually order it, they'll just turn it around. I mean, think about this concept. That's how much they are personalized and anticipating what I want. How many government websites do you go to that say, oh, welcome, Ira. I know exactly what you're trying to go do here. Right? I mean, you go to a website, and rightly so. Government is a massive platform, and our government agencies serve so many different constituents, but void from most of these is that personalization, that anticipation, that even the anticipation that I'm an individual trying to do something versus a corporation trying to do something, or being able to quickly navigate what I'm trying to do to get to the answer of my question. So personalization is a critical component of the overall experience, and as we're thinking about adapting the next generation of systems. Okay, so there's a variety of techniques we can use. These are some of them. I'm going to read each of them in detail and tell you about every one of them. Just kidding. Okay, let me talk about a couple of quick examples. One is a rumble. Rumble is you get together in a room with a variety of stakeholders associated with a system, and you creatively think through the process. It's not just about technologists. You have to have users in there. You want people from different backgrounds who are going to be a part of the process. And you brainstorm and you write things down and you figure out expectations. Sometimes you use toys to figure out how to be creative. And there's a lot of Lego usage. The Lego company must love service design, because every service design process I've seen Legos involved. I don't really know why. Okay? So, but it's all about creativity and unlocking that creativity and thinking differently. Let me give you an example. We sent a team of folks from a government agency. I won't name the agency in this public forum, sent them up to New York to one of our design studios to do a creative session. And it was a 2-day session. And when they got back to their hotel room, they had homework. And we gave them magazines, and they had to cut out pictures and words that were the emotions that they expected that they felt and that their citizens who were using their system felt when they were trying to use the process. And they said, this is the most ludicrous, ridiculous thing I've ever gotten done in my life. They were like astounded by this. And by the next day, total converts. They loved it. They were raving about it because it changed the perspective they had of how you build and leverage technology to interact with people and humans, okay? So in less than 2 days, total converts to the process. So rumbles and these creative sessions where you come together and really gnash things out is one approach. Another approach is journey mapping, thinking through step by step all the components that are required. Another step is blueprinting, right? And thinking from soup to nuts about the blueprint. Now, are any of these revolutionary concepts? I mean, maybe you haven't used Legos at work, but a lot of these things have been core processes of how we built systems for many, many years. But the key is we're applying it in a slightly different way. We're bringing in experts in design and innovation to be infused into the process. We're unlocking creativity and realizing that human dimension, it's not just something we're going to say is a part of the process. It's something we're going to build into the process and make a core component of what we're doing and how we're solving the problems. Okay? So let me come full circle. I'm not just here to talk about service design in some sort of vacuum. We do this with Pega. Okay, so we're doing some of the largest Pega implementations in all of the federal government today. And one of the most recent successes was all about taking Pega and applying it with service design as the core of how we're thinking about the journey of the experience of the citizens that have to use the system, of the employees that have to use the system, how we're going to design the component. Pega is an exceptionally amazing engine and phenomenal technology. And what we want to do is combine the amazing platform that Pega provides with service design and with this ability to think differently about how your constituents, whether they're employees or citizens, are going to use this technology to get the most out of what they're trying to do. And that's what we do. So with that, let me see if there's any questions that I can answer. I was that comprehensive today? No questions? Yes, please.
So, most of these. My name is Sandesh Patil. The question I have for you is, this sounds really good, very exciting, and when you are working on a project where you have to deliver core functionalities, how do you embed this thinking? It sounds more like culture change, convincing your senior management stakeholders, include this concept and still deliver on time under budget.
Great question. So I would hear the question with the mic, right? So how do you, the way that I think about this is if you marry this, especially with Agile software development, you change the notion. How many guys are familiar with Agile? Okay, most everybody, fantastic. And so having applied Agile in large scale in some of the biggest systems in government, when you do Agile right, you prioritize what's most important. Okay, and it's not about defining the strict set of things that have to be done or else the system isn't going to go production, which let's not kid ourselves. We know that 80% of the functionality, 20% of the functionality takes 80% of the time at the end, and that's why most systems end up being particularly late. So if instead you're iteratively thinking about this, you're trying to get out as much valuable functionality as quickly as possible with a structured Agile approach, you just prioritize this along with everything else that's required in the process. I wouldn't say you need to replace security with service design and human-centered thinking. That would be a ludicrous thing to say in this environment, right? You don't want to do it at the sacrifice of other things. You want to do it perhaps at the sacrifice of functionality that's not as valuable as giving your user an exceptional experience. And particularly if you're using Agile so that you can adapt and prioritize and constantly cultivate what your priorities are going to be and set those rolling deadlines for how you're going to provide incremental valuable software, it's not hard to do.
How was that put into a requirement?
How do you put this into a requirement? So you're talking about, so the question was, how do you put this into a requirement, in case anybody didn't hear it? So the challenge is, are you talking about from a procurement perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a very complicated thing to talk about, but we've been involved in a number, I'm happy to talk about it offline, because there's so many different techniques that you can do it. But service design is not a proprietary process. This is not something that only Accenture does. We do it, better than anybody else, of course. But it's not. We're not the only ones who do it. And you can come and visit our design studio that's up at 12th in New York, and we're happy to show you and inculcate you to what this process is like and how we go about doing this. But you can inculcate it in a procurement the same way you would anything else in terms of expecting that there's going to be this kind of design thinking as a part of the procurement, that you have proven techniques to do it, whether not only just like you would put in security expertise is critical, user experience design expertise is critical, service design could easily be a valuation factor just like any other technical characteristic that you're looking for. How you procure for it and how you budget for it is the key depending on the kind of procurement that you're trying to do, of course. That's why it gets complicated, is based on the way you're trying to procure things. Yeah, but we've had standalone engagements that are nothing but doing service design and setting a multi-year roadmap for agencies on particular programs. So, time for probably another one or two questions. Question over that side. I think there's two questions here, and then we'll finish up. So let's go in the back, and then we got you, gentlemen.
Hi, I'm Leon. I just wanted to know in the room how many people have actually done projects using empathy. How many people have done that here? And then how many people have actually done customer journeys as a part of their project? Okay, that's probably more than I expected. So what I want to know is, like, how can you at least advocate to management the value of customer journeys and actually get them to pay for it?
So you know, there's a couple of things. That's like, in some ways, it's like, in some ways, they have to experience it to understand it. So I'd encourage you to, like I said, bring them down. We'll bring them down to give them a Rumble tasting and give them an experience of the kind of thing that you're talking about, number one. Number two, everybody's expectations have changed. It's not just our users. It's not just us in the room. The your leadership's expectation continues to evolve. And especially with change of administration, regardless of, we know there's a change of administration no matter what happens 2 weeks from today, right? Thankfully, this will be over and we'll have a change of, you know, some sort of change, right? I mean, thankful because of the election. There's not an aspersion on the current administration whatsoever. Let me be clear, okay? So there's going to be new leadership in most agencies that are going to think differently, and this is a reality. 85% of Americans is an overwhelming mandate of the expectation. We're talking all the time with organizations in terms of how do we change that. And so we're happy to, by the way, connect you up with people like the Partnership for Public Service that talks about a citizen satisfaction index and where they've surveyed different agencies and which ones are leaders versus not and models they can fit. We're happy to come in and expose leadership to different techniques like this. And the beauty of them is we're not talking about bits and bytes. We're not talking about technology or artificial intelligence or something that these guys don't understand. We're talking about things that everybody understands how to design the concept of wanting exceptional experiences. So I think that's kind of starting to change. But at the end of the day, it's sort of like saying, well, we don't have enough time. We're going to just leave time out for security. We're not really going to make a secure system. That's been done many times. We all know many systems that have been built where security wasn't a core part of the requirements, but I don't think in today's environment that's an option. I think security has to be a core component of everything that we build. And quite frankly, I believe that design thinking should be a component of every system that's built today from the ground up for government. So happy to help work with you to expose the management of your organization to the concept if you want. I think there's one last question right over there, sir.
How do you know when to upgrade and revise the systems? If people's tastes are fluid?
Great question.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic question. So everybody heard it. How do you know when you should upgrade or revise systems? So that joke was whenever Pega tells us to was the answer there. All right. So anyway, let's talk about this in two ways. Okay. One is just websites in general. Let's talk about information websites. The reality is I remember evangelizing the internet. Okay, again, I'm much older than I appear, okay? And so I remember going to federal agencies back in the 90s. I remember the agency I was at when they're like, tell me about Mosaic and how you support web browsers. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me figure that out, right? I remember that. I remember being in that meeting, right? But the reality is, back in the version 1 of the internet, everybody thought, we're gonna put up a website for our agency and check, we're done. Success, let's move on. Remember that? And everything was static. And the reality is that today, if you're just putting up an informational site, I'm not even talking about a transactional system. If you're building an informational site, it has to be fluid. You have to assume that you're going to adapt and evolve over time because people's expectations are that if you have a system that looks stale, that's 10 years old, it might still be functional, but it's not going to engage them the same way. So that's what you have to do is you have to distinguish between the nice to have reality that if you're building a modern web system, it's not a one and done scenario. It's an evolution that you should constantly be thinking about the design to adapt to the evolving expectations of citizens. But having said that, there's major expectations and minor expectations. What do I mean? minor expectations are, this doesn't look as cool as other sites. I don't think that our target is cool. Like, does anybody think that the target for your agency is being cool and being like on the hip end of design? I'm not talking about that. Major trends are things like, does our site work as well on a mobile phone as it does on a PC? Does it work on a tablet as well as it works on a PC? Does it work on a Mac and not just on Internet Explorer? I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There's still systems that only work in Internet Explorer that we all run into over time, all right? And so thinking about some of these major changes in terms of adapting to the preferences or the ways that users are trying to consume technology is one of the most critical things that you have to think about these. And it doesn't mean every time there's a new phone out or a new interface or a new version of a phone, you have to quickly run and adapt and take advantage of the latest features. But it does mean that over time, depending on whether you're dealing with citizens or employees, you do need to think about these evolutions and adapting to them to be able to effectively serve citizens. So what I'd say is you have to look at what these major adoption cycles are and make sure that you are anticipating them and at least having your roadmap reasonable timeframes to adapt to these changing expectations. I mean, the smartphone revolution is only 10 years old, but if you have systems that don't support citizen-facing systems that don't have responsive design, that are not adapting to this, you have to kind of scratch your head and say, it's at least 6-7 years that we knew that this was happening. Right? So you've got to figure out how to do this. And Pega is a phenomenal platform to do that. And if you leverage it effectively, you can adapt over time. It's not about scrapping what you did and starting over again. It's about evolving and incrementally changing what you're doing over time. So with that, I stay here if anybody has any more questions, but I appreciate the time today. Thanks.